All right, so we're gonna do another Scrimba challenge, and the challenge is to connect the form to local state. For a second, I read that wrong. So basically, he wants us to create a state object to store the four values we need to save, and then to create a single handle change function that can manage the state of all the inputs and set it up correctly. And then when the user clicks sign up, check if the password and confirmation match each other. If so, successfully signed up to the console. If not, log passwords do not match to the console. So also when submitting the form, if the person checked the newsletter checkbox, log thanks for signing up for the newsletter to the console. So right now, let's go ahead and just see what happens when we console.log or when we go ahead and run the form. So right now, if it lets me, okay. So right now, if I say joe at doe.com, Joe, and sign up for the newsletter and click sign up, nothing happens. Okay. So let's start with the first thing, and that's creating our state. So we can just say, let's just get some form data and let's set our form data and let's equal that to react.use state. And we're going to store this inside of an object because we have three things that we need to fill out: the email address and the password and the checkbox. So right now, what we can do is go ahead and say email, and we could say address, but we'll just keep it short. And then we can go ahead and say password, store that here. And then we can go ahead and say newsletter. I think this can stay like this. And by default, we'll say true. The user does want to visit or subscribe to the newsletter by default. So now we have our handle submit already, but we want to do our handle change. So the handle change is going to go ahead and handle what happens on every single change. So I'll show this in a second. So we can say function handle change. And the first thing I'm just going to log out is event.target. So now when we go to one of our inputs, like let's say this input right here, we can give it an on change, or we can give it, an on change and equal that to handle change. And when we put something in there like T, we get the DOM element, but this isn't really a DOM element. It's actually an object that JSX creates. So one thing that we do want to reference is the name. So if we do that, we get nothing because this doesn't have a name yet. So we want to give this a name of email. So did that wrong there. Want to give this a name of email. So now when we target this, we get that we are modifying our email. And then another thing we can do is console.log our event.target.value. And now this is going to give us the value that we enter. So it's only going to work for the email because that's the only one we're modifying right now. So what we can do with these two different things is that we can destructure our target, so our event target. And we can do this by saying const, and then we can grab our name and our value and equal it to event.target. And now this allows us to use both of these console logs that we made up here as global variables. So now if I console.log our name, we see that we're getting email. And if we console.log our value, we are getting the value. So we're using object destructuring to almost append name to the end of event.target, almost like saying that, but instead we can just use it as a global variable. So now what we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and update our state. So now we can say set form data. we want to take the previous state or this previous object that's up here, and we want to go ahead and use implicit returns to return back to us an object with the previous state's elements, so email, password, and newsletter, return back to us, and we want to say the name is going to equal the value. So this is almost like saying name of email and then value of whatever we insert, and that'll be the state of the email. We'll modify it every time we modify the name or email. So now we can go up here and oops, kind of messed up there. We can console.log our form data, and now we see that we get all of our values, and when we put in a password we don't update, and that's because there's no name or onChange property on the password. Instead, when we update our email, joe@gmail, we see that we are getting the state of the email, we're getting the state of the email live. And here's a problem. So right here we need to use, I think it's called deferred returns. So what this means is that because this is the name property on an object, it only accepts a string. So it's returning back the string of name. But name is a variable that we're using on a dynamic string. So what we need to go ahead and do is wrap this inside of an array literal. And then now our email should be updating correctly. So yeah, that's cool. Now we can move on and we can add the password of name. And remember, this will have to be the same name as password up here. So we can say password. And what we can see is now password still won't work because we still haven't put the onChange. Before I move on though, I want to do one more thing to this up here, this input, and I want to give it a value equals to the form data.email. So now instead of the email controlling its own state, it will get its state controlled by our form data state. So now if I say joe@gmail.com, it'll update up here. And if we didn't, let's actually keep this the same. We'll just say Joe, and we won't get our value from state. We'll see that the form is actually controlling its own state. So to fix that, we can just say value equals form data.email. So this object right here. So now we can move on here. So our name, of course, is going to have to be password. The onChange, of course, is going to run handle change. And then the value is going to get its value from the state of form data.email or .password. And now, of course, if we say John Doe, we will populate that password from state, letting us know that it's getting its value from state. So now on this last one, we can go ahead and confirm password. This is a bit different. So this should still get its state from here. We'll just say confirm password. So confirm password. So now the name here is going to have to be confirm password. We'll say onChange. We are going to get the handle change, and then the value of this is going to be from form data dot confirm password. And now we see we get a password here of test, and the confirm password will be different. Let's say of West. So now we can go ahead and do that. So let's see, that can manage all the state and inputs. So now let's go ahead and move on to our input ID. So this is going to be a bit different. Instead of it getting its state kind of how this is getting its state, it's getting its state from a boolean instead of a string. So that means instead of using the value, we would have to use checked. So we would say checked equals, and then we would take our form data dot, and then we would take our newsletter. And then now, since the newsletter is true up here, that checkbox will be true, and now when we make it false, it will be false. So we want this to be true by default, but it doesn't work. So now to go ahead and fix this, first of all, we need to give it the name of newsletter. And then we need to go up here and we need to, first of all, access its type. And then second of all, access its checked. And we can do this by using event.target.checked and event.target.type. But we would just put it in our object destructuring. So we would say type, and we would say checked. And something that would change here, well, first of all, let's just see what we get when we say type. So when we get type, we see that checked prop without an onChange handler. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So let's give this an onChange handler of handle change. And when we go ahead and we click on this, we get its type, and its type is a checkbox. And then we can also get its checked property, and its check property will be false every time because we can't toggle it just yet. So how do we fix this? Well, we can reference the name directly, but we want to check if the type is equal to checkbox. So as we've seen up here, when we console.log our type, we see that when we clicked, it's a type of checkbox. When we go up here, it's a type of email. Go up here, it's a type of password. Go over here, and that's a type of password as well. So what that means is that the type, if it's equal to checkbox, then we'll get its value from checked if it's true. Otherwise, if it's false, then we'll just get its value from value here. And I just opened up this weird icon there, but that's fine. So now this should toggle false, true, false, true, false, true. And then everything else should still work. So the email should enter Joe. Password should be Joe. And then the confirm password should also be Joe, and it'll all work correctly. So now we can rerun this real quick and we can say never. So now moving on, so we want to say when the user clicks the sign up, check if the password and confirmation match each other. If so, log successfully signed up to the console. So now we want to go to our handle submit, and this comes from the on submit of the form. And what we're going to do is prevent default first of all, but we also want to say, we also want to check if the form data password is equal to the confirm password. So what we can do is say if, and then we can go into form data dot, and we can say password equals form data dot confirm password, and we can say not. And we can open this here, and we can console.log passwords don't, and I'll have to use these instead. So we'll say passwords don't match. So now let's go ahead and sign up for our form. We can stop tracking the state here, and we're comparing the state of the form data password with the form data confirm password. And we're saying if it's not true, then we're going to go ahead and say the passwords don't match. So if I go ahead and say joe@gmail.com, one thing I can also do is remove this from here. So we can say joe@gmail.com. The password, let's say Joe, and then the confirmed password will be Schmo. When we go ahead and sign up, or we try to sign up, we get nothing. So let me see what's going on there. So we get our prevent default. Let's see here. Because we're not logging our console log. So if so, log successfully signed up in the console. One thing I want to check here is what if we say signed up? So that should run when we go ahead and click. But if form data password equals that, let's try something real quick. Joe, let's sign up. So now it's saying passwords don't match. So instead we can say if the password successfully signed up. Let's grab this message here instead. And then we can say else, and we can do something else here. Passwords do not match. So instead we can console.log passwords don't match. And just for my OCD sake, I'll go ahead and do this. So when we enter this and we say Sam and then Sammy, two different passwords, and we sign up, the passwords don't match. But if I change that to Sammy, we successfully signed up. So now also when submitting the form, if the person checked the newsletter checkbox, log thanks for signing up for our newsletter to the console. So this is weird. So now I don't know if we should make a whole nother if else statement, or if we can nest an if else statement. So we can say if form data dot, and then we can say newsletter. We can also say console.log, and we can run this message. Thanks for signing up for our newsletter. So let's see if this will work. So we're going to say joe@gmail. We're going to say doe, and we'll say successfully signed up. Thanks for signing up for our email. We can say else, console.log, and then we can say, well, I don't think we need an else statement for that. And then we know we got it wrong if we say Joe's and then Joe, and we try to sign up, the passwords don't match, so it won't let you do anything. And then if we fix it, we get sign up, and you signed up for the newsletter. And what we can also do to confirm this is say form data dot, or instead we can just console.log our form data. And this would almost be like sending it off to an API. So we're gonna say we were successful, and then we get successfully signed up. Thanks for signing up for our newsletter. If we unclick this, we get successfully signed up, but we did not sign up for the newsletter. And that's kind of how I would set it up. I could use ternaries instead. So honestly, I don't think I'll use ternaries here. We'll see what Bob does and see if he does this a little bit differently, but this is kind of how I would set it up because it's pretty understandable. We're just saying if the password equals the confirmed password, we'll successfully sign up in console.log the form data. And also if the form data is newsletter is true, then we'll also thank the user for signing up for the newsletter. Otherwise, we're just going to say, hey, the passwords don't match. And we're checking for our state correctly here and updating the values based on this destructure right here from this object. And if the type is checkbox, then we'll run checked. And if the type is a string, then we'll just run value, and the form works. well, flawlessly. So that's it for this challenge. I just kind of wanted to record me going through it, but moving on.